What's going on, y'all? KM Best here. Let's take a look at the hottest of takes from my community and the Marvel Snap world at large. Most high elo content creators are disconnected from the reality of actual Marvel Snap. They play in echo chambers. So I think this is true enough that I'm willing to admit that like a decent portion of it is true, but also elides some important things. And I think what this gets wrong very specifically is positioning the people who aren't high elo as real Marvel Snap and the high elo people as, like, I don't know, highfalutin ivory tower snooty liberals who just don't really get what it's like to be a real Marvel Snapper. I think that positioning is incorrect. But it's speaking to a larger truth, which is metagames, say at 70 to 99 and at top 10% infinite, are actually different. And this was so compelling to me that I actually went and did some research. This is going to be the first ever Hot Takes episode to have infographics in it because this is such an interesting question to me. So I went and looked at the actual metagames from the top 10% of infinite and at 70 to 99. On the left, you'll see the metagame at top 10% infinite. These are the 12 most played cards. I'm using this to serve as sort of a proxy for what a metagame is like. After all, a metagame is really just what you're playing against, so the most played cards, I think, is representative to some degree. Now, what you'll notice is many of these cards are actually the same. Jeff especially being the most played card, that is something that is shared. Red Hulk in the top 3, Nebula in the top 4. Both of those remain constants over the course of going from the 70 to 99 metagame to the top 10% metagame. Now, one thing that I really noticed here is that while there are, of course, Blink, Ravonna, these are constants as well, there are actually 6 cards that do not show up at 70 to 99 that do show up in a major way at top 10% infinite. Those cards, of course, are Professor X, Cannonball, Nocturne, Nico Minoru, Angela, and Kitty Pryde. Now, I was sitting there thinking, why is this happening? Why are these cards not showing up at 70 to 99 to the degree that they are showing up at top 10% infinite? So I started looking into if it was an effectiveness thing. And what I came across was the fact that actually all of these cards are better at 70 to 99 than they are at top 10% infinite. What that implies to me is that if you listen to top 10% infinite players and play the decks they're playing at 70 to 99, what you'll actually get is a good deck, right? Like, if you think that the major thing that top infinite players are getting wrong is like they play too much Profex, they play too much Cannonball, they think this stuff is too much of a problem, and you're in 70 to 99, I can see how you would get to that issue, right? Like, this is a thing. However, if you just took one of my decks, like my most recent deck posted, I think is an Angela, Kitty, Cannonball, Profex, Nocturne deck, and you took that into 70 to 99, you'd probably actually have more success because of how underplayed it is. So in a meaningful way, these metagames are different. It's just they're not as different as you would expect them to be. What's happening in 70 to 99 is just there's more kind of bad cards being played and less kind of good cards being played. One of the things that really stuck out to me on that first chart was that Jeff was a 50% play rate at 10% infinite and only a 30% play rate at 70 to 99. Another thing that stuck out is it seems entirely possible to me that there's a card acquisition based explanation for this, meaning that there is an interesting conversation to have about power creep when one of the main things you can notice about the meta differences is having Cannonball, having Jeff, and having Nocturne. That's a conversation that I'm not sure is germane to this video, but it is an interesting thing to point out. Now, as far as the idea that Snap creators, high elo creators exist in a bubble, I think that that is sort of putting it on the wrong way. It's saying, that's wrong, where I'm at is right. What's really happening is we're all in bubbles. Everyone's in a bubble. And your bubble is mostly determined by, how good the people you're playing are and how hard they're actually trying to win. And I think that that is, it also, we go back to the pay to win thing, it also sort of is determined by what tools they have available to them. So I think the next time people try to levy these criticisms on people, on content creators, they should think about, which one of us is actually in the bubble. Because the answer is both of you are in the bubble. you're both in a bubble where your experiences will differ. However, the numbers do seem to suggest that if you just take a deck from a top 10% player, it's A, either probably going to be a thing you're already playing, or B, probably going to be hitting on an underplayed part of the meta. If you look at my recent decks, there's a lot of Kitty Pryde, Profex, top 10% type stuff, right? And if you took that into 70 to 99, those win rates are actually pretty high. It seems to imply that it actually is a good thing to listen to good players in terms of what to play. Now, I do think some of this is my fault. I think that I talk about stuff in context so much that it gives the impression that the things I do are only good in that context, right? When I talk about Professor X, I tend to talk about him as in a meta-contextual way, where I talk about him as a card that is powerful against certain strategies. And I think that might have elided the fact that he's actually just very powerful, period. And people seem to focus on the meta aspect of him, where it's like, oh, Professor X, you play that to beat Hela, you play that to beat Bounce. It's like, that's part of it, but I play that because Marvel Snap is a game about winning 2 out of 3 locations, and there's a lot of really good ways to win 1 location on the final turn of the game, and there's very few ways to win 1 location before the final turn of the game, and he's the best of those, right? Like, that's why Professor X is good. It's not like, oh, he beats Hela, oh, he beats Bounce. It's just a base level thing. You like to win 2 out of 3 locations, and he's a card that says win 1 location. And I think that that is something that sort of gets elided. When you watch one of my videos, I talk a lot about metagame positioning, why each choice that I made is a choice that I made based on the context that I have it in. And that's because I structure my content around giving you the tools you need to take my decks and customize them to what you're seeing. That's why all of my deck videos are 20 minutes of me talking about every specific choice I made. It's not to tell you, oh, these are the choices I made and here's why they're right. It's to tell you, here's why I made those decisions so you can make different ones. I want to empower you with my thought process so you know, oh, KM was doing this, but I don't really see that, so I can get rid of that, right? That's what my goal is. My goal is to avoid the issue of being out of touch by giving you as many tools as you can to customize what I do to what you see. It seems that in so doing, I have given a false impression that everything is about meta context. It's really it's an important thing to do at the top end of ladder is to, play the deck that beats what you're seeing. That's an important thing to do anywhere. But it's not the be all end all. You're still restricted into playing things that are actually good. All that matters is cube win rates. And yet everybody talks first and foremost about win rate, even though it's completely irrelevant. A 25% win rate deck with an average cube win rate of 1.5 cubes per game is far superior to an 80% win rate deck with a 0.5 cube rate. Numbers exaggerated. So since the numbers are exaggerated, I'm not going to dive into the relative mathematical impossibility of that happening. The reason I focus on win rates when I talk about decks is because cube rates are not an inherent quality of a deck. Not to a degree that I consider meaningful. And that is because snapping and retreating is so individualized. And knowing when to snap and retreat, and your opponents knowing what you're doing, are the major things that impact cube rates, right? You're going to get a lot of cubes playing an Invisible Woman weird deck because your opponents don't know what you're doing. But at Top Infinite, at least, once you have done that enough, people will know what you're doing. And once people know what you're doing, your cube rate will drop dramatically. I consider cube rates more of snapshots in time. They're relevant, but what they're really doing is saying, how prepared are people to beat you? And if people are not prepared to beat you and they don't know what you're doing, cube rate can be very high. But if people are prepared to beat you and they do know what you're doing, cube rate can be very low. I think that the reason I focus so much on win rates is because that's something I do believe is relatively more inherent to a deck. It's not the most inherent thing to a deck, but being able to win, if you know that you can win these games, then you can start working on when to snap in them, how to maximize your cube rate. I look at, is this deck baseline good, before I look at, is this deck going to have a high cube rate, because a high cube rate is so dependent on all these other factors that I can't control. Now, there are combo decks that typically do have the profile of like lower win rate, higher cube rate. I mean, like that doesn't mean that like everything is about win rate, but it does mean that like when I talk about a deck like Hella, when I talk about a deck like Mr. Negative, I can't really like straight faced say, oh, this has this cube rate, that's going to stay true forever. I think that's so much more dependent on who you are as a player and who the people you're playing against are as players than it is anything else. Whereas win rate is like a better measure to me of how things match up into the other things they are seeing. Nocturne single-handedly killed Magic decks. I do not believe this to be true because I actually think more Magic is being played post-Nocturne than pre-Nocturne. I think that Nocturne being around actually did something for Magic decks, and it's weird because, I just talked about how cube rate sucks, but like this is an example of why it's kind of an issue, right? Nocturne, I think, evened out the cube gain potential of Magic decks. And what I mean by that is in previous metagames, when you were playing Magic, what would happen is you would run the risk of getting rug pulled and having your limbo turned off, but you didn't actually know it would happen. When Nocturne is on the board, you knew it would happen. And so what that did for the Magic decks was instead of this situation where you're playing like your Magic Doc deck, you gain 2 cubes because you force them to retreat, you lose 8 cubes because they turn off your limbo, right? That's not happening anymore. There is a Nocturne on the board. Now you know that you can just leave. You are aware that you can just leave. It evens out that robbery potential of the deck. And I think that now that the deck is no longer just like freely losing these high leverage, high cube games to surprise location tech, it's kind of in a better position. The number 1 played location tech, as far as I'm aware, is going to be Nocturne. Number 2 is probably Snow Guard. And those are cards that are very telegraphed. You know they exist. It's just a question of whether they're going to be played or not. And so you can choose to leave in the situation where your opponent has told you, hey, I have the ability to turn off your limbo if you don't really feel like staying is worth it. And I think that that is a big buff, actually, to Magic decks. Has there been enough power creep that I can have 3/5 Loki back? He does not need to trigger Collector. No, there has not been enough power creep that you can have 3/5 Loki back. I think that is kind of a ridiculous ask. Loki is not very well positioned right now because we're in a metagame that is pretty heavy on like combo type decks that aren't very good to play Loki into and tend to go taller than him when they actually play against him, like Hella, like Bounce, things of that nature, right? And that's a good thing because Loki is typically strongest in his metagames against other mid-range decks. So what that means right now is we haven't really found a solid, like, just good cards deck that can reasonably compete against all that stuff. The best we have is this Profex stuff, but the interesting thing about the Profex stuff is, like, it's not all that bad into Loki because your I win combo is still an I win combo, even if they also have some of that stuff. So it's not the end of the world getting Loki there either, right? You still have Profex Cannonball, you could still win these games. It's just a little bit harder to pull off, but it's not the same way that Loki would just like free beat a Silky Smooth deck, for example. Loki is a mid-range hammer. He will always exist in the context of this is the deck that beats the just generic points and interaction mid-range decks. He's going to be good for that forever. And I think that's fine. I do not think we need to sit down and start seriously considering buffing that card. It's more important for the longevity of the game that we focus on playing for fun rather than playing for competition. Competitive play is important and will always be a part, but if we lose focus on having fun in a game, the game will die faster. Fun decks are better than competitive decks. I think this is a good point to talk about something. I don't really care if the game dies. Like, obviously, I like my job right now. I'm happy to be someone who is able to make money off of this. It has a great work-life balance, a great freeing schedule for me. I like it. I think that I could probably go get another job, right? Like, to the degree that I care about the game existing, it's because I like my job. But I don't think that I need to be invested in this in that way. I don't think that it is incumbent upon me to keep the game alive. That's not my job. I think if it turns out that I can't keep doing what I'm doing, I'm fine, just go get another job, a real job. I've had those before. I'll have them again. And I think that the idea that it's somehow incumbent on creators to like shill in the correct way is kind of ridiculous to me. Like, I don't work for them. It's not my job to make content that helps keep the game alive. I am fine getting another job. And I think that actually makes me like a little bit less compromised than someone who is highly invested in Snap. And it's like, it has to be Snap. Oh, it's Snap, it's Snap, it's Snap. I need this game to keep going because I'm too afraid to get a real job. Like, that ain't me. I'm sorry. And so I will do what I find fun, which is trying to compete. 4-cost leech meta was better than this meta. I'm not going to talk about the actual substance of this question because I think it's just too early to say stuff like this. I posted this on like Tuesday. Leech was changed like the previous Thursday. And it's like, oh, 4-cost leech meta was so much better than this. What are we doing? It's been like 4 days. I'm recording this on like a Friday, right? Like, this has been a week and a day. And we're like, I know what this meta is. I know what this meta is. This meta sucks and I hate. We haven't even had enough time to like try stuff yet. I don't know. It's been I think what? Yeah, it's been a little bit. It's been a week and a day. And I think that the confidence with which people say stuff like this meta sucks. It's been 8 days. Second Dinner doesn't care about the leaderboard and the ladder experience, which is demotivating a lot of top players and hurting the player base. Broken and hard to find leaderboard, for example. I think it's true that they don't particularly care about the top ladder experience. I think that they very sort of specifically market themselves as like a fun, fast, casual game. And people playing for competitive fun are an aberration to that they're happy to have, but they don't really view as essential to the game's function. I think that's true. I think it is. Yeah, I think you could argue it's demotivating a lot of top players. I see a decent amount of that, but I also think it's like, not something they care about by design. This is not like something they think they need to fix. It's just not where their focus is at. And I don't really mind. Like, I think a lot of people assume like, oh, Cam Best, you must care about this. You're competitive. I just like playing the game. And for me, playing the game is like a fundamentally competitive endeavor, but that doesn't mean that I have to be like, oh, we need prize support, we need tournaments, we need all of this from Second Dinner, or you don't care about us. It's like, I think actually that part of what I've done that's made me able to keep making content, to keep being invested in this game, to keep caring, is taking days off and trying a little less hard and not very specifically trying to grind a rank 1 and all that stuff, right? I'm pretty good at the game and I can help you get better at the game. That's really all I want to do. And if that ends up being, and I think when people talk about like, oh, it feels demotivating, it's like, oh, I'm grinding for nothing. And it's like, well, why are you grinding in the first place? I think top players should take a look at that and ask themselves what they're doing and why they're doing it and if it's worth it or not. Because I don't want to see people get burned out. And I think the fact that I take like legitimate full days off of playing this game. Like, I will not finish quests. I will take full days off. We are done. I'm not touching this game. Is part of why I've been able to have longevity as someone who's doing what I do. Because I think if I were like constantly no life grinding, I would also have these problems. But because I'm not, I don't. Loki isn't OP. People just hate getting teched with their own tech. I think what's actually happening with Loki is like, yeah, he's kind of demonstrably not OP right now. I think people, like, once a narrative has been established, it's very hard to break it. And so once you see people saying, this card is busted, this card is OP, this card is unfair, I think it's very easy for that to just be what the card gets perceived as the entire rest of the time, power agnostic. And I'm going to head something off right here. A lot of people are going to be like, that's what happened to Eliath. Wrong. Eliath was like top 5 on win rate when it got nerfed. Like, that's not true at all. Eliath was demonstrably stronger than Loki is right now when it got nerfed for the final time. So let's just head that off right now. As far as why people don't like it, I think a lot of it is that it's very hard to extricate I don't like losing from I don't like losing to X, Y, and Z, right? A lot of complaints about cards are fundamentally, I don't like losing. And that is not valid because losing is just a thing you're going to have to get used to. But they often get couched in, I don't like losing to X, where X is the thing the card that beat you does. So it's like, I don't like losing to Goliath. I don't like losing to Red Hulk. I don't like losing to Loki, and then like Reason, right? With Goliath, it's like, and it feels like nothing I did mattered. With Red Hulk, it's like, that's too big. With Loki, it's like, I lost to my cards. It's hard to extricate the actual feeling of how a card plays from it beating you, I think. And that's sort of what gives me pause with Loki. Most people know climbing the infinite ladder involves skill and a little bit of luck. I'd argue a large chunk of it is also time. Give a mid player 40 hours a week and a great player 5 hours a week, and the mid player would come out on top. Depends on how mid we're talking here. Your base point is correct. It is a large component of time. Absolutely. No arguments here. Just, how mid and how great are we talking here? Because it can be a little bit of an issue, right? When you get towards the top end of ladder, you start needing like a higher win rate and cube rate to even maintain your rank. I have had days where I will go like 26 and 26 on a deck, and I'll be like net +1 cubes. But in terms of my SP, that's like negative 50 SP, because when you're that high up, you kind of need to get closer to like a 66% win rate or cube gain rate rather than just gaining 1 cube over the course of that many games. So I think there is a point at which the mid player will find themselves totally unable to actually climb that the great player will actually be able to climb through. Proving grounds should only be to 8 cubes, not 10. Yes, strictly correct. It needs an expansion set at least twice per year plus the weekly cards. I think that would be a huge ask, but it would definitely be cool. I think that that's kind of like an unrealistic ask based on what I'm aware of about the size of the design team and the dev team there. But at some point, I think that would be a really cool thing to look into. That's a super cool thing to do. Absolutely nothing wrong with using all of the time you are given and or emoting aggressively. At the end of the day, if you're playing competitively, you play tons of mind games with emotes and the clock. I think part of the thing about the emotes that bothers people is that they're not being used in this way. I think I would have a lot more respect for someone who is trying to mind game me in-game with emotes than I would for someone who Miss Marvel emotes at the end when it's clear that they've won. Right? Like, I think a lot of people sort of get it twisted, right? What we're talking about is BM. It's kind of rude to, once you've won, be like, ha ha, what up, dude? And I think the other thing that's really stuck out to me as a streamer is something that's really apparent to me is that people, again, we tie in this like, oh, I hate losing to X thing, right? Well, the contra of that is I like winning. And so when I win, I think it's a good game. And a lot of the times what will happen to me on stream, and we've done a lot of experiments like counting this, is people emote GG after games they win way more than after games they lose. There's a lot of people in the comments who are going to get mad at this. All I can tell you is it's probably like a 9-to-1 ratio. And that's crazy considering I have most of the people I play muted already. Like, almost every GG we get is after I lose. That is like a very real thing because they win, they feel great, they beat the streamer, they feel awesome, they were like, oh yeah, GG, dude. And that makes me feel like sort of an object to be farmed rather than a person. I can say that much at least. And I that's why I don't like it personally. I would have so much more respect for emotes if they were actually being used in the game to convey some sort of bluff, right? But they're not. They're being used after the game to convey, I'm really happy I beat you, or ha ha. You can reach infinite rank with almost any deck if you know your best and worst matchups, and if you start thinking they're retreating for 1 cube as a win. I actually think this is like way too long of a statement. You can reach infinite rank with almost any deck. Period. Card acquisition is horrible, and content creators have no real concept of how the spotlight system feels for normal casual players. Also, content creators are not calling out Seconditer enough on their atrocious monetization. this just like sucks, right? Simultaneously, I cannot know what the experience of a normal player is, but I'm also supposed to speak to it and call them out on how terrible the normal player experience is. When I see stuff like this, it's just like, I'm just a dude with a bed sheet, right? Like, I I'm not like I have an apartment. It's like we got like this room and then like a bedroom and like an open kitchen living room thing. It's not the fucking ivory tower over here. I'm not like rolling in it with shill bucks or whatever. My background is, it's not a bed sheet actually. My girlfriend got it a while back. I don't know what it is. I've just been here ever since and I don't want to change it now. But like I'm not really in a position where I'm compromised by the massive amounts of money I'm receiving from second dinner. Like, that's not a thing. I'm allowed to say what I feel, and so that's what I do. And when you disagree with me, I think it would be nicer if you just disagreed with me as opposed to, like, you liberal ivory tower shill kind of stuff. Like, it doesn't really feel like a disagreement on the merits, but more like a statement that I cannot ever have a correct opinion by default. Original Blob was perfectly balanced. No, it wasn't. That was a 650. That was terrible. What are you talking about? I still enjoy Marvel Snap, but there has to be a bigger new thing ASAP, because people, even some content creators, have started to lose interest in the game. For the first time, I'm afraid for what future this game has. The new cards and OTAs won't be enough to engage for players. This sort of goes back to the thing I was already talking about, where it's like, with all due respect to Second Dinner, because I am grateful for the opportunity that I have, like, to make card game content about a good game, right? I am not married to this. Like, I'm happy to get a real job. It's not my job to keep this game alive. It's their job. It's not mine. And so when people come to me and be like, content creators are leaving the game, like I think Drew Barry and Mogwai, and, I like those dudes. Yeah. But that's not my problem, right? It's not about that for me. It's like, I play the game because I like it. And if that ever changes, that'll change. But it's not my job to be like, here's what they can do to keep Mogwai. That's not my job. I don't care. Like, I'm happy doing what I do. And as long as I can do it, I'll do it. But if I can't do it anymore, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, God, we needed to keep Drew Barry and Mogwai. Like, they're human beings. They're allowed to go play other games. We've got a real 1-2 punch here. Hela is the most brain-dead scrub deck in the game. Also, Galactus isn't always has been a bad card that is counter to the core of Snap. It should be removed from the game and replace World Ship as a super rare location. Shang-Chi is the most brain-dead, skill-less card in the game and should be a 6-cost card. This sort of goes back to the thing where I think that it's very hard to extricate I hate losing from I hate losing to X. And I think in both of these cases, it's like, I have lost to this thing, therefore it is brain-dead, it is skill-less, I hate it, right? That's just kind of a dumb way to talk about stuff. Like, it exists. Are you going to deal with it or not? Like, that's literally the only question that needs to be answered when it comes to stuff like this. Like, oh, this card is brain dead. Who cares? Who cares how skillful it is if it beats you? If you're losing to the scrub, what does that make you? All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through that video. I greatly appreciate people that watch through all of this stuff. It is still shocking to me that it happens, but I am super grateful. As always, I have been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. I do want to say, I got a lot of comments that were like hitting content creators, and I kind of think that's cowardly. So next time, what we're going to do is we're going to say, if you want to name or attack content creators, you're going to have to name names, because if you're doing it under my posts, I'm going to assume you mean me. And I think that's a reasonable assumption to make, and I'm going to respond in that way. So if you name content creators who are out of touch, who don't get it, you're going to need to name names. I'm going to need to see some actual, not some cowardice out of you. I'm going to need to see some bravery. I'm going to need to see you stand on business. Otherwise, I don't think I can really address that stuff anymore, because it's just nebulously lashing out. You need to be specifically lashing out. And with that advice, I think it's time to end. Thank you so much. I've been KM Best, and we'll see you in the next one.